I met her on a Wednesday, the kind that didn't ask to be remembered. Gray light. Coffee gone cold before I finished it. My hands smelled faintly of printer ink from the shop downstairs, and the air outside the campus bookstore felt like it couldn't decide between spring and rain. That's when I first saw her, not in some cinematic way, but because she was standing exactly where I needed to put a signboard, and she didn't move. She just looked at it, then at me, with that expression older people sometimes have when they realize the world keeps replacing itself with younger versions. New faces, new words, new rules they didn't agree to. Sorry, I said, half raising the wooden board like it was an apology. She gave a polite nod. Don't let me interrupt. Her voice, calm, deliberate, carried that unteachable kind of composure. She wore a long charcoal coat, a stack of papers pressed against her chest. Everything about her said collected, except for the faint tremor in how she adjusted the strap of her bag. I didn't know her name yet, just that she looked like she'd been waiting for something that hadn't come for years. Later that day, she came into the bookstore. She asked about a first edition of The Waves, Virginia Woolf. No one else even looked at the classic shelf anymore. Try the second row, near the window, I said, leading her there. She followed, but didn't look at me, only at the books, tracing the spines with her fingertips as if reading their memories. When she found it, she smiled faintly, not to me, but to the air. That's a rare pick, I said, because silence felt too loud. I teach it, she replied. Or I try to. Most of my students want things they can finish in one sitting. Her tone wasn't bitter, just tired in a way that felt familiar. I'm not in your class, I said, and immediately regretted how that sounded. She looked up then, finally meeting my eyes. Her irises were a dark, unreadable brown. Then what are you doing here? The question caught me. Maybe it wasn't meant to. I shrugged, trying to find something that lasts longer than a scroll, that earned the smallest, most reluctant curve of her mouth. Not quite a smile, more like she remembered what smiling used to feel like. When she went to pay, the card machine jammed. I tried fixing it, fingers fumbling with the cable, and she leaned closer, her perfume soft and clean, sandalwood, maybe, or something like it. The distance between us shrank to the quiet space where breathing becomes part of conversation. You don't have to fix everything, she said lightly. I can try, I murmured before I realized I'd said it out loud. She paused, just long enough to notice, then slid her card through herself. As she turned to leave, I said something stupid, something too impulsive for the quiet moment it came from. You're just walking out? She stopped halfway through the door, didn't look back. You're just a stranger, she said. Maybe that should have been the end. But I heard myself answer, low and clumsy and too honest. Then let me be yours. She didn't reply. The bell above the door rang once, sharp against the hush of the shop, and she was gone. I told myself I'd forget about it. About her. About the half-second of eye contact that felt like the world had turned its head. But that night, when the streetlights flickered through my window, I found myself thinking about the scent of sandalwood and paper, and the way she said stranger like it wasn't an insult, just a truth she was trying to believe. And somehow, I hoped she hadn't believed it completely. It had been 3 weeks since the bookstore, long enough for the memory to fade if it were going to. It didn't. She walked back in on a Thursday, coat damp from the drizzle, hair slightly out of place. Something about her looked less precise this time, like the day had worn her edges down. Elena Ward, she said when I asked if I could help. The name fit her, strong, slightly formal, like it belonged to someone who spoke carefully and didn't waste words. She was looking for a book to replace a loaner that one of her students had lost. It's embarrassing, she murmured, half to herself. You'd think at my age I'd stop caring about paperbacks. Her voice cracked just slightly on embarrassing. I noticed it, though she pretended she hadn't said it at all. While she scanned the shelves, I offered to check the back room. She nodded, distracted, eyes on the spines, thumb brushing dust off the corners. There was something unguarded in that motion, soft, habitual, not meant for anyone to see. When I returned with the book, she was sitting at the counter stool, rubbing her temple. A stack of student essays sat open beside her. Rough day? I asked gently. She let out a small laugh, quiet, breathy, but real. You have no idea. Half of them think Wolf was an influencer. I smiled, and she smiled too, almost reluctantly, before catching herself. I shouldn't be here, she said, glancing toward the rain-streaked windows. Why not? It's a habit. When I don't want to go home, I come here. That made me pause. It was the kind of sentence people say when they don't mean to reveal anything. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was careful, like we were both trying not to startle it. When she gathered her things, one of the essays slipped off the counter. I reached for it at the same time she did, and our fingers brushed. Just a second, nothing dramatic, but her hand froze in mine before she pulled back too quickly. Her ring finger was bare. I shouldn't have noticed that, but I did. She cleared her throat, standing abruptly. Thank you for the book. You sure you don't want a bag? No, she said, then after a breath, I'll be fine. It sounded like she was trying to convince herself. As she turned to leave, I caught the faint scent again, sandalwood and rain. And for some reason it hit different this time, sadder, like memory. Professor Ward? I said before she reached the door. She stopped, half-turned, one eyebrow raised. You said you come here when you don't want to go home, I said quietly. So, maybe next time, don't wait for an excuse. For a long second, she didn't move. Then, barely, she smiled. Careful, she said, voice soft, almost a whisper. You're starting to sound less like a stranger. The door chimed again as she left, and her reflection lingered in the glass for a heartbeat before disappearing into the rain. I stood there, books still in my hands, wondering if I'd just been invited closer or warned away. It was late, later than we meant to stay. The bookstore had closed an hour ago, the lights dim except for the one above the counter. Rain tapped against the windows in slow, uneven rhythms, like someone knocking but not sure if they should come in. Elena was sitting on the floor, papers spread out in a chaotic circle, student essays again. I was helping her sort them, though helping meant mostly watching her sigh at half-finished thoughts written in blue ink. She looked different under that small pool of yellow light. Less composed. A loose strand of hair kept falling forward, and she didn't bother fixing it. The sleeves of her cardigan were pushed up, showing pale wrists marked by faint impressions where she'd worn a watch too tight. You don't have to stay, she said, not looking up. I know. She smirked at that, a tired, crooked sort of smirk. You always say that like you're waiting for permission to do the opposite. I didn't answer, maybe because she was right. When the thunder rolled outside, she flinched almost imperceptibly. I noticed, of course, I noticed everything about her now. The tremor in her breath, the way her fingers stilled on the paper. You okay? She hesitated. I used to love storms. Now they just remind me. Of what? Her hand hovered over the essay, then withdrew. Of how loud things got before they went quiet. There was something in her tone, not about the weather at all. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Some silences you don't break. You just sit beside them until they forget to guard themselves. So I sat down on the floor too, close enough to hear her breathing, close enough that the space between us began to hum with something neither of us named. Her phone buzzed suddenly. She glanced at the screen and pressed it face down without answering. The motion was too quick, too practiced. Everything okay? She nodded, too fast. My ex-husband. He still thinks I'll pick up if he calls after midnight. The word husband stung somewhere I hadn't realized was open. You don't have to explain, I said quietly. I'm not, she replied, then added. I just didn't want you to think I was waiting for anyone. Something in that sentence flickered between confession and defense. I looked at her, really looked, the tired eyes, the quiet dignity, the thin layer of control that kept everything else from spilling out. You don't owe anyone an explanation, I said. Not even me. She laughed softly. That's exactly what someone says when they want one. She was right again. When the power flickered, instinct made her reach for my arm. Just a second, her hand gripping my sleeve, warmth through fabric. Her eyes met mine, startled by her own reaction. Sorry, she whispered, drawing back, but not completely. The lights steadied again, leaving us in that strange, charged quiet where both of us were pretending nothing had happened, except our bodies hadn't gotten the memo. She started gathering her papers, voice too casual. You should go before the rain gets worse. I stood, but neither of us moved toward the door. Her hand brushed mine again, this time deliberately or maybe by accident. I couldn't tell. "Elena," I said, her name softer than it should have been. She looked up, waiting. I opened my mouth to say something. Anything, but the word stuck. The air between us filled with everything we weren't saying. And then she exhaled, long and careful, and said, "Good night, Noah." She turned away before I could answer. The thunder outside carried what I didn't say, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted it to stop. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned. She was sitting alone in the university cafe, papers untouched, staring through the window like she'd forgotten what she came there for. The afternoon light made everything look faded, the kind of light that turns people into memories before they've even left the room. I almost walked past her. I told myself to. But she looked up at the exact second I hesitated, and that was it. "Noah," she said, like the word had been sitting in her throat for a while. "Professor Ward," I answered, out of habit. She winced faintly. "Don't," she said. "Not today." So I sat across from her. The table between us felt smaller than it should have. We didn't talk for a while. The clatter of cups and low hum of conversation filled the silence we didn't know how to use. She traced a finger along the edge of her coffee mug, round and round, never lifting it. Finally, she said, "I shouldn't be here with you." It wasn't anger, just weary honesty. "Then why are you?" Her eyes flicked up, sharp, then softened. "Because I wanted to see if I could be." Something heavy pressed against my ribs. "And I don't know yet," she whispered. "You make it too quiet inside my head." I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it wasn't something people said to strangers. Her phone buzzed again. Same name on the screen, same unreadable look as before. She turned it over, face down. "You could answer," I said. "I could," she replied. "But then I'd have to explain why I'm here, and I don't even know the answer to that myself." We both stared at the untouched coffee between us. It had gone cold. After a long pause, I said, "We keep ending up in the same places." "That's not coincidence," she murmured. "That's carelessness." There was something like self-blame in her tone, and it hurt, not because she was wrong, but because she believed it. "Then maybe I'll be careful," I said quietly. She laughed, small, brittle. "Careful? You're 28. You're supposed to be reckless. And you?" Her gaze met mine then. "I'm 45. I don't get to be." The air between us thickened, not romantic, not safe, just real. She stood, gathering her things, but didn't move to leave. Instead, she leaned both hands on the table, head bowed slightly. Her voice came out lower than before. "What are we doing, Noah?" The way she said my name, it wasn't scolding. It was a confession. I swallowed. "I don't know. Maybe just talking." "People don't talk like this," she said. "Not when they're trying to stay untouched." I wanted to say something, anything, but the truth was, I didn't know how to stay untouched anymore. She looked at me for a long, unbearable moment. Then she said, almost to herself, "You make me remember things I promised I'd forget." And before I could ask what she meant, she was gone, leaving her coffee half finished, her chair still warm, and a silence that felt louder than anything she'd ever said. It was raining again, not the cinematic kind, just steady, unremarkable drizzle that filled the city with gray noise. I was closing up the shop when she appeared in the doorway, umbrella dripping, eyes unfocused like she'd walked through the weather without feeling it. "Noah," she said softly, as though testing if I was real. Something in her face made me forget to breathe for a second. Her usual composure was gone. She looked unanchored, like someone had pulled a thread loose inside her. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer right away, just set her umbrella against the door and took off her coat. Her clothes were damp at the sleeves, hair clinging to her neck. "I shouldn't have come here," she said, "but I didn't know where else to go." "Then this is the right place," I said quietly. We sat in the back office, surrounded by the smell of paper and rain. She hadn't brought any essays this time, just a small envelope, folded twice. She held it like it might burn her. "Do you ever meet someone," she began, "who reminds you of a person you lost, but not in how they look or speak, just in how they wait for things?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I understood. She placed the envelope on the desk between us. "This was written by my brother." He died 6 years ago. He was 28. The number hit me before the meaning did, my age. He was everything I wasn't, she continued. Patient, unafraid to care about people. I used to tell him it would ruin him. And then, she stopped. Her throat worked, but no words came. I didn't reach for her hand, though I wanted to. I just sat there, the rain filling every silence we didn't know how to hold. He wrote me this letter a few months before the accident, she said. I found it again last night. She opened it slowly, the paper soft from age. Her eyes scanned the page, but her voice shook when she read aloud. You spend your life watching from a distance, Lena. One day you'll meet someone who steps closer. Don't push them away. Her voice broke on the last word. She pressed her lips together, as if embarrassed by the sound. I swallowed hard. He knew you well. She gave a faint, aching smile. Too well. And then you walked in that day, holding that stupid signboard, looking at me like I wasn't invisible. And all I could think was, she stopped herself. Looked at me instead. All you could think was what? I asked. That he was right, she whispered. And I hate that he's right. Her hand trembled as she folded the letter again. I noticed how her nails were short, uneven, like she'd been biting them. She never seemed like the kind of person who did that. I leaned back, unsure of what to say. The room felt smaller. You remind me of him, she said finally. That's what scares me. The words landed like a slow impact. Not painful, just altering. I'm not him, I said gently. I know, she replied, eyes glistening. That's what scares me even more. The clock ticked. Outside, the rain softened into mist. She stood, smoothing her coat with shaking hands. I think I came here to say goodbye, she said, though she didn't move toward the door. And I, too still, too afraid of the moment breaking, just whispered, Then why haven't you left yet? She looked at me for a long time, long enough for something wordless to pass between us, and then turned away, leaving the letter behind. Her brother's handwriting stared up at me from the desk, one line underlined twice. Don't spend your life watching from a distance. And for the first time, I realized she'd sent the only one who had been doing that. I found her sitting on the back steps behind the bookstore the next morning, the letter resting in her lap like an unwanted truth. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, the kind of half-light that makes the world feel paused between endings and beginnings. She didn't turn when she heard me approach. You shouldn't be here this early, she said softly. I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. The air smelled faintly of rain and old coffee grounds. She was still wearing the same coat as last night, hair pulled back loosely, dark circles under her eyes. Somehow, even undone, she looked like someone holding the weight of her own restraint. I sat down beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder through the chill. You left the letter, I said. I know. Was I supposed to read it? She smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the empty alley. Maybe. Maybe I wanted you to understand me before I could explain myself. We sat like that for a long while. No talking. Just the sound of distant traffic and the occasional bird testing the morning. Finally, she said, I thought I was protecting myself by keeping distance. From people. From this. Her hand twitched between us, an unspoken reference neither of us needed named. But all I've done is build a quieter kind of loneliness. I nodded. I get that. I know you do, she said. That's why it's harder. Something in me gave way, not a decision, just a slow, inevitable understanding. That we weren't standing on opposite sides of something forbidden. We were both caught in the same waiting. When she turned toward me, her expression was stripped of everything polished. Just tired eyes and a hint of something like peace trying to find its place. I don't know what to call this, she admitted. You don't have to, I said. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, and without thinking, I reached out and tucked it behind her ear. She didn't move away. Her breath caught, small, quiet, and then settled again. We stayed like that, my hand half resting near her jaw, her eyes fixed on some invisible point between us. I keep waiting for this to feel wrong, she whispered. But it doesn't. That scares me. It should, I said, barely audible. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to respond, but instead she leaned her forehead against mine, a soft, trembling contact that said everything words couldn't carry. The city around us began to wake. Somewhere, a door opened, and a delivery truck rattled past. Still, neither of us moved. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a promise. It was something smaller, a quiet acceptance that whatever this was, it had already changed us. She exhaled, her voice barely above the morning wind. "Noah," she said. "Yeah. Let's not name it," she murmured. "Let's just let it be what it already is." And in that silence, forehead to forehead, breath mingling in the pale dawn, I realized we'd stopped searching for what this meant. We were simply existing in the middle of it. It's been 6 months since that morning behind the bookstore. 6 months since she leaned her forehead against mine and changed the temperature of silence for me. We still see each other, though not in the ways people expect. Some weeks it's coffee at the same corner table. Sometimes it's just a message about a book she's rereading. Sometimes days pass without a word. But the strange thing is, I don't need constant proof anymore. What we have lives in the quiet between things. I've learned that love, if that's even what this is, doesn't always arrive in declarations or timing that makes sense. Sometimes it comes disguised as stillness, as long pauses between sentences, as the way someone glances at you before remembering they shouldn't. She taught me that restraint can hold more intimacy than touch ever could. And maybe I taught her, or reminded her, that not everyone walks away just because the world says they should. The first time I saw her again after a few weeks apart, she looked lighter. Not younger, just less defended. She'd started wearing her hair loose again, the way it used to fall when she forgot to be careful. We talked about ordinary things, her students, the weather, the bookstore getting new owners. But under it all, there was something shared, a soft understanding that we had already crossed a line and neither of us needed to return to the other side. One afternoon, as we walked out together, she said, "You're quieter now. Maybe I finally learned to listen." She smiled. "To me? To everything," I said. She didn't reply, just slipped her hand briefly into mine as we crossed the street, not out of impulse or rebellion, but as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That was the moment I realized love doesn't always have to begin. Sometimes it just continues, like something that had been waiting under the surface, patient and unnamed. Sometimes I wonder what people would think if they saw us. The age gap, the unspoken rules, the invisible line we blurred just by sitting too close. But then I remember, no one else was there for the silences. No one else knows what they sounded like. And maybe that's enough. These days, when she leaves, she still says, "Good night, stranger." But she says it differently, softly, with a trace of warmth that wasn't there before. And I still answer the same way, every time. "Then let me be yours." Not as a question now, but as something that already belongs to both of us. I don't know where this story goes next. Maybe nowhere, maybe everywhere. But if you've ever met someone who made you remember the sound of your own voice again, then you already know how it feels to be here.